You caught my attention with the sound first, James Cooper. It was a desperate, muffled whimpering, piercing the heavy silence of the Florida Everglades. As a 28-year-old former Army combat medic, and on his third day volunteering with the Cypress Wildlife Recovery Team, he thought he was prepared for what these vast wetlands could throw at him. He'd come to Florida looking for peace after 2 tours in Afghanistan, hoping the methodical work of environmental conservation might quiet the noise in his head. But that sound, pained, frightened, unmistakably alive, sent a familiar jolt of adrenaline through his system. The morning started routinely enough. The late August heat was oppressive by 7 a.m., when the 5 volunteers gathered at the ranger station near the conservation area's western edge. Unusually heavy summer rainfall had raised water levels across the region, flooding typically dry areas and displacing countless animals from their habitats. Their assignment that day was straightforward: survey the northwestern quadrant for distressed wildlife, particularly the endangered Florida panthers that might have been forced into unfamiliar territory by the rising waters. About an hour earlier, James had separated from the group, taking the northeastern path that snaked along a series of cypress hammocks. The terrain was challenging, knee-deep water in some spots, thick mud in others, all of it hiding the ever-present threat of alligators and water moccasins. A dense canopy of cypress trees filtered the sunlight into a greenish glow, creating an otherworldly atmosphere that still felt foreign to him despite his weeks in Florida. The whimpering grew louder as he pushed through a tangle of sawgrass toward a small clearing. His first thought was an injured deer, or perhaps one of the panthers they'd been searching for. What he saw instead nearly stopped his heart. There, half submerged in murky water and thick mud, was what looked like a large dog, no, too big for a dog, struggling weakly against the swamp suction. James froze, his mind racing to process it. The creature was tawny-colored, its matted fur darkened by mud and water. Its head was disproportionately large for its unusually thin body. As it turned toward the sound of his approach, James found himself staring into a pair of amber eyes that reflected an intelligence far beyond a common wildcat's. It was impossible. No lions existed in the Florida Everglades. And yet there it was, unmistakably a young male lion, maybe 2 or 3 years old, judging by the sparse mane clinging to its neck like wet straw. The animal was severely emaciated, its ribs clearly visible beneath its mud-caked hide. One front paw was extended toward solid ground, as if reaching for escape when its strength finally gave out. James's first instinct was to radio for backup, but as he reached for his equipment, the lion let out another pitiful sound. Not a roar, not even a growl, but a soft, almost human-like moan that resonated with something deep in his chest. He'd heard that same sound from wounded soldiers in the field, the sound of someone who'd accepted their fate but was still, against all reason, hoping for salvation. Without fully processing his decision, James set down his pack and began to assess the situation with the methodical precision his military training had instilled in him. The lion was stuck in what locals called a sugar hole, a deceptively deep pocket of quicksand-like mud that could trap even the strongest animals. Based on the disturbance around the area and the lion's weakened state, it had likely been trapped for days, its strength gradually sapped by hunger, dehydration, and the constant struggle to stay above the surface. The rational part of James's brain screamed at him to back away. This was a wild predator, regardless of how weakened it appeared. Approaching it was nothing short of suicidal. He should call for the wildlife rescue team with proper tranquilizers and equipment. He should follow protocol. He should, at the very least, maintain a safe distance. Instead, James found himself slowly removing his boots and socks, securing his phone in a waterproof pouch, and wading into the shallow water at the clearing's edge. The mud sucked at his feet, confirming his assessment of the sugar hole's danger. He'd need to distribute his weight carefully to avoid becoming trapped himself. The lion watched him with those unnerving amber eyes, too exhausted to muster fear or aggression. How a lion had ended up in the Florida Everglades was a mystery that would have to wait. News reports over the past year had occasionally mentioned exotic animals being abandoned by owners who'd acquired them illegally during the pandemic and then found themselves unable to care for growing predators. Just 3 months ago, a Bengal tiger had been discovered in an abandoned house outside Miami, half-starved and still wearing a jeweled collar. The lion before him likely had a similar story, a victim of human irresponsibility, now facing death in an environment utterly foreign to its nature. As James inched closer, careful to test each step before committing his weight, he kept his eyes locked with the lion's. In Afghanistan, he'd learned to read the intentions of locals through their eyes when language failed. Those lessons seemed oddly applicable now as he searched the predator's gaze for any sign of fear or aggression. What he found instead was an exhaustion so profound it transcended species, the universal recognition of imminent death. The lion's breathing was shallow and labored, its once powerful body now a shadow of what nature had intended. James estimated that without intervention, the animal wouldn't survive another day in the swamp. The Florida sun beat down mercilessly through gaps in the canopy, adding dehydration to the lion's already dire circumstances. Time was a luxury neither of them possessed. James was now close enough to smell the musky, feral scent of the big cat, an odor unlike anything in his experience, wild and ancient and utterly out of place in this subtropical wetland. He was also close enough to see the extent of the animal's predicament. The lion was submerged up to its chest, one front paw stretched out onto slightly firmer ground, the other hidden beneath the murky surface. Its hind legs appeared completely engulfed by the viscous mud. Each labored breath seemed to sink it slightly deeper into nature's cruel trap. Using techniques he'd learned during wilderness survival training, James began gathering fallen cypress branches from the clearing's edge. He moved deliberately, never turning his back on the predator despite its weakened state. The branches would need to be positioned strategically to create a makeshift platform that would distribute his weight and provide a stable surface from which to work. It was a time-consuming process, made more difficult by the oppressive humidity and the constant awareness of the suffering animal just yards away. As he worked, James's mind drifted back to a training exercise in Nevada, where his unit had practiced extracting wounded soldiers from desert quicksand. The principles were similar: distribute weight, create a stable platform, focus on upper body extraction first. He'd never imagined applying those skills to rescue a lion, but the methodical nature of the task helped calm the thundering of his heart. The lion tracked his movements with diminishing interest, its survival instincts gradually giving way to the lethargy of approaching death. Twice it attempted to pull itself forward using its extended paw, only to sink deeper into the mud's relentless grip. Each failed attempt seemed to drain what little fight remained in the magnificent creature. After 20 minutes of preparation, James had assembled a crude but functional platform extending from the firmer ground toward the trapped lion. He secured his phone to an overhanging branch, setting it to record video. If things went wrong, at least there would be evidence of what had happened to him. If by some miracle they both survived, he wanted documentation of the encounter. With the platform in place, James removed his shirt and wrapped it around his left forearm, a pitiful shield against claws and teeth evolved for tearing flesh, but better than nothing. From his pack, he retrieved a coil of nylon rope, a first aid kit, and a water bottle. He took a long drink, then poured some water into his cupped right hand and cautiously extended it toward the lion. At first, the big cat regarded the offering with dull incomprehension. Then recognition flickered in those amber eyes. With tremendous effort, the lion stretched its neck toward James's hand and began to lap weakly at the water. The rough tongue against his palm sent shivers of both fear and wonder down James's spine. This simple act, offering water to a dying creature, bridged a primal gap between man and beast that few humans had ever experienced. James allowed himself a moment of hope. The lion's acceptance of water suggested it wasn't completely beyond saving, and it appeared too weak to pose an immediate threat. Still, he harbored no illusions about the danger. A cornered animal, especially a predator, could summon surprising strength in moments of desperation. One swipe from those paws, even in the lion's diminished state, could open his flesh to the bone. With painstaking care, James began positioning himself on the branch platform, testing each placement before transferring his weight. The mud beneath protested with glutinous bubbles and ominous shifting, but the makeshift structure held. He was now within arm's reach of the trapped animal, close enough to see the flies gathering at the corners of its eyes and the ragged rise and fall of its rib cage. James had assisted in numerous wildlife rescues since joining the Cyprus team: alligators caught in illegal traps, deer entangled in abandoned fishing nets, even a Florida panther with a paw impaled on a rusted fence post. But those operations had involved teams of trained professionals with proper equipment and safety protocols. What he was attempting now was beyond reckless. It was potentially suicidal. Yet, looking into the lion's eyes, James found he couldn't turn away. Using the nylon rope, he fashioned a large loop and carefully extended it toward the lion's outstretched paw. His plan was to secure the rope around the leg, or ideally under the animal's chest, creating a harness that would distribute the pulling force and prevent further injury. It was a technique used for extracting injured dogs from disaster sites, scaled up for a creature several times larger and infinitely more dangerous. The lion watched the approaching rope with mild curiosity but made no move to resist as James maneuvered the loop around its mud-caked paw. Whether this compliance stemmed from trust or simply exhaustion was impossible to determine, but James seized the opportunity to work the rope further under the animal's chest. The process was excruciatingly slow, each movement deliberate and gentle to avoid startling the unpredictable predator. With the rope finally positioned, James began testing its tension, applying gradual pressure to gauge the lion's reaction and the mud's resistance. The initial response was discouraging. The suction of the mud fought against him like a living opponent, and the lion released a low groan that vibrated through James's bones. But he persisted, adjusting his position on the platform to gain better leverage. What happened next occurred with such swiftness that James would later struggle to piece together the sequence of events. As he leaned back to apply more force to the rope, the branch beneath his right foot gave way with a sharp crack. In the moment of imbalance that followed, James instinctively reached out to steady himself. His hand found purchase on the only solid object within reach, the extended paw of the lion. Time seemed to crystallize in that moment of contact. James found himself gripping the lion's paw, or perhaps, more accurately, the lion was gripping him. Their eyes locked in a primal connection that transcended the natural order of predator and prey. Neither moved. Neither breathed. The universe contracted to this single point of contact between two species that had evolved on opposite sides of an ancient divide. The lion's paw was surprisingly warm, its rough pads a testament to a life meant for the African savanna rather than this Florida swamp. Despite its emaciated state, the sheer size of the paw in James's hand was a visceral reminder of the natural power contained within the animal. One reflexive contraction of those muscles could unleash claws capable of disemboweling him in seconds. Yet those claws remained sheathed. Whether from weakness or some unfathomable instinct, the lion did not attack. Instead, as James cautiously regained his balance, he felt a gentle pressure against his hand, not the crushing grip he feared, but something almost resembling a human handshake. It was likely just a desperate animal seeking purchase, a coincidence of mutual need, but in that moment, it felt like something more profound. Steadied now, James did not withdraw his hand immediately. Instead, maintaining eye contact with the lion, he slowly adjusted his grip until he was holding the animal's paw with deliberate purpose. The lion's amber eyes registered confusion. Then, what James could only interpret as a flicker of understanding. Man and beast, momentarily transcending their natural roles through the simple act of touch. The spell broke when the platform shifted again, reminding James of their precarious situation. With renewed determination, he repositioned the rope while maintaining his connection to the lion. Now, with one hand still grasping the massive paw, he began to pull with his other arm and the full strength of his legs. The mud resisted, jealously guarding its prize, but James could feel a subtle change in the tension, movement where before there had been only stubborn stillness. Encouraged, James increased his effort, bracing himself more securely against the cypress roots. Sweat poured down his face, stinging his eyes and soaking his remaining clothes. His muscles screamed in protest, but the adrenaline coursing through his system pushed him beyond normal human limitations. The lion, sensing the possibility of freedom, seemed to gather its remaining strength. Its body tensed, and with a tremendous effort, it pulled against the mud while James pulled from the other direction. For several agonizing moments, nothing happened. Then, with a sound like a cork being drawn from a bottle, the suction broke. The lion's front half surged forward, nearly toppling James from his precarious perch. Mud splattered in all directions as the animal's torso emerged from the swamp's grasp. Its hind legs remained trapped. But now there was hope where before there had been only inevitable death. Adjusting his strategy, James maneuvered around to the lion's side, carefully avoiding its head while maintaining a reassuring touch on its shoulder. The animal was trembling with exhaustion, each breath a labored gasp that fogged the humid air. It made no aggressive moves, seeming to understand on some level that this human represented its only chance at survival. Using the rope as a harness around the lion's chest, James established a new pulling angle to free the hind legs. This proved more difficult, as the animal's weight worked against them now that its upper body was supported on solid ground. Time was becoming critical. The lion's strength was fading fast, and James's own reserves were not unlimited. The Florida sun had risen high, beating down through the canopy and turning the clearing into a sauna. With a final desperate heave that threatened to tear the muscles in his back, James felt the resistance give way. The lion slid forward onto the muddy ground, entirely free of the swamp's deadly embrace. It lay there panting, too weak to stand, its once golden coat now a grotesque mask of drying mud. But it was alive, and for the moment, that was enough. James collapsed beside the animal, maintaining a cautious distance now that it was no longer trapped. His body shook with exhaustion and delayed fear as the reality of what he'd just accomplished began to sink in. He had freed a fully grown male lion from a swamp with nothing but rope and branches. It was a feat that defied both common sense and self-preservation instinct, the kind of story no one would believe without evidence. The lion's eyes remained fixed on him, but there was no aggression in that steady gaze, only exhaustion and what James chose to interpret as grudging acknowledgement. They were two beings united by an extraordinary circumstance, their natural roles temporarily suspended by mutual need and effort. Reaching for his pack with trembling hands, James retrieved his water bottle and his emergency medical kit. Veterinary care was beyond his training, but he could at least clean the worst of the mud from the lion's face and offer more water. Moving with deliberate slowness, telegraphing each action, he poured water into the lid of the bottle and placed it within reach of the lion's muzzle. The animal drank weakly but with obvious gratitude, its rough tongue lapping at the life-giving moisture. James refilled the makeshift bowl several times until the lion had consumed nearly a liter of water. Only then did he activate his emergency beacon and reach for his radio to call for professional assistance. The response was predictably incredulous. James had to repeat himself 3 times before the coordinator at base camp accepted he was serious. Yes, an actual lion. No, not a Florida panther. Yes, he was certain of the identification. No, he was not injured. Yes, the animal was still alive. A specialized wildlife rescue team was dispatched immediately with an estimated arrival time of 45 minutes. Those 45 minutes stretched into an eternity as James maintained his vigil beside the recovering predator. He used the time to clean the worst of the mud from the lion's face and eyes with moistened gauze from his first aid kit, each touch a negotiation of trust between natural adversaries. The lion accepted these ministrations with surprising tolerance, too depleted to resist but still tracking every movement with alert eyes. As they waited, James spoke softly to the animal, his voice a gentle constant in this alien environment. He had no illusion the lion understood his words, but the cadence seemed to have a calming effect on them both. He told the lion about Afghanistan, about the peace he'd sought in the Everglades, about the strange twist of fate that had brought them together. The one-sided conversation helped distract him from the throbbing in his overexerted muscles and the lingering awareness of just how close to death he had come.